People are lighting up all over the country. They call it the green rush. Marijuana has moved out of the back alleys and into the open.
Happy Cannabis Cup, y'all.
In some states, it's legal to grow, to sell, to smoke. And marijuana could be legalized in a city near you. So easy to get, and many think so harmless. But when the smoke clears, is marijuana bad for you? Or could pot actually be good for you?
Marijuana is better than all those pills for you in terms of treating?
Yeah. I travel the world for answers. What does marijuana do to you? What does it do to your kids? A special investigation. Weed. Our journey begins here, in this small town home, nestled in the mountains, with a family who has never allowed TV cameras in before. And you're gonna soon learn why.
This is so pretty out here. Yeah.
They live in Colorado, one of 2 states where it's legal to smoke pot medically and recreationally. But here, it's also taboo to residents like Paige Figge and her husband, Matt.
I'm sure it was mentioned to us by someone, hey, you should try this. And I thought, no way.
You thought that's fringe stuff?
No way, not in a million years, no.
But in this area, marijuana is far from fringe.
4 joints, and do you want Island Sweet Skunk?
Medical dispensaries are everywhere.
Hey, welcome, guys.
People are smoking in private clubs and public festivals. But none of this is for Matt. He's a military man, and marijuana would be a career ender.
I grew up in Wisconsin in a well-loving family, and I was educated that, like, oh, that's a drug. You don't do that. And I never did.
But just decades ago, marijuana was a legitimate medication, also called cannabis, prescribed by doctors and dispensed by pharmacies.
This is Harry J.
But that all changed in 1930.
A relentless warfare against
Henry Anslinger, the United States' first drug czar. For him, public enemy number 1, you guessed it, marijuana.
This guy saw how he could increase the budget of his department by having this mission, going after marijuana.
You know, saying that there's this drug that the Mexican migrant workers are smoking, and it's loco weed, and it's going to make them crazy, and they're going to rape your women.
He got the anti-marijuana message out through news reports. And then came this.
It is convinced that he is hopelessly and incurably insane.
The film, Reefer Madness, portraying the users of marijuana as unproductive, crazed.
People are still afraid of what pot can do to them.
In many ways, to have defined our attitudes now for 70 years.
Yeah.
Marijuana then became illegal in 1937. And by 1970, it was a Schedule I controlled substance. The government was saying it had no medicinal value and had a high potential for abuse. All reasons why the Figgies stayed away from marijuana. Until this. And this might be hard for some of you to watch.
It's okay, baby.
This is their daughter, Charlotte, having a seizure.
We just thought it was just one random febrile seizure.
Nothing to really do,
Right.
no medications. It's a fluke.
Right.
A fluke made sense. After all, Charlotte, nicknamed Charlie, was born perfectly healthy, a fraternal twin to sister Chase.
Charlie always had big, big smiles. Just happy kids.
Easy.
Yeah, easy. Very much so.
So it was around 3 months, you said, that when you
Yeah.
first noticed that
Yeah.
Charlotte had a seizure.
I was changing her diaper, well, putting a new diaper on from after the bath, and her eyes just started flickering.
It led to the first of many trips to the ER.
They did the $1 million workup, the MRI, EEG, spinal tap. You know, they did the whole workup and found nothing and sent us home.
No abnormal blood tests, no abnormal scan.
And developing normally, too. You know, talking and walking, and the same day as her twin. Nothing was behind yet.
By the time she was 2, though, the seizures had become constant and started to take their toll on their once happy, joyful little girl.
She started to really decline cognitively, and she was slipping away, and she just wasn't keeping up with her twin.
The Figgies finally found an answer. It was awful news. Dravet syndrome. It is severe, intractable epilepsy. The seizures start during the first year of life and are unstoppable, difficult to control, and very damaging.
Severe behavioral problems, attention deficit and hyperactivity, the self-injury, banging her head on the floor and pulling her hair out, and like a possessed child. This isn't your perfect, happy Charlotte.
It was a race against time. Many Dravet kids die young, in early childhood. Charlotte was almost 3. For the next 2 years, the Figgies tried everything. Strange diets, acupuncture, and dozens of powerful drugs like Valium, Ativan, phenobarbital. But nothing seemed to help. Even worse, some of the medications nearly killed her.
After 1 dose, she stops breathing. And after 2 doses, her heart will stop.
Did you have to do CPR then on her yourself?
Yes. I remember when her heart stopped and I had her pulse and I lost her pulse. There was just nothing. The ambulance is on its way.
She survived.
You're okay. Mommy's here.
But now it was fall of 2011, and Charlotte was 5 years old.
When things were at their worst, she just sees all night, and the kids are sleeping either in my room or next door. They can hear her, the seizure scream all night, 50 times a night. And Chase would come in the morning and just, this is her twin, and just hug her and like rub her head and say, I'm just so glad you survived through the night last night.
Matt had been deployed to Afghanistan, and the only thing he could do to help was start scouring the internet. And he stumbled onto this video of a child using marijuana.
So how's everything going? Jaden had 4 days without a seizure.
I'm like, wow, having success on specifically Dravet, this is interesting. It's natural.
And while he couldn't ever imagine taking marijuana himself, he was now in the stunning position of recommending it for Charlotte.
I was like, we need to do this.
And I said, I don't know.
Charlie, there you are.
And then Charlotte's condition got worse. 300 seizures a week, almost 2 every hour. She was not talking or moving, basically catatonic. As a last resort, doctors wanted to either prescribe a powerful veterinary drug used on epileptic dogs or put Charlotte in a medically induced coma so her brain and body could rest. For Paige, those were not good options. But maybe, just maybe, marijuana now was. But she was about to find out how hard that would be.
This isn't go to the pharmacy and pick up your medicine. There was no protocol.
When we come back, what will the Figgies do? And what would you do if this were your daughter?
I had resigned myself. I don't think she's gonna survive this.
We've seen her flatline in the hospital. We've said goodbye.
You're listening to Matt and Paige Figgy describe their own daughter. What would you do if this were your child? Charlotte Figgy had an extreme form of epilepsy. Her body was so frail that any seizure could kill her. With no traditional treatment left to try and the clock ticking away, her parents decided to try marijuana. Charlotte was just 5 years old.
You need a card in order to be able to get the cannabis from a pharmacy. Doctors have to prescribe it.
You need 2 doctors in Colorado to get the card for a juvenile or a child. It was hard. We were the first young child, and they said no. Everyone said no, 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 no.
Certainly her age played a role in my hesitance.
Dr. Alan Shackelford is a Harvard-trained physician. He's also among a handful of doctors in Colorado who give prescriptions for medical marijuana. From the moment Charlotte entered his office, he knew she was in trouble. While he was just examining her, she had 2 seizures.
She'd failed everything. There were no more options for her. Everything had been tried, except cannabis.
Here's how scientists think it might work. Marijuana is made up of 2 ingredients. THC, that's the psychoactive part that makes you high, and CBD, also called cannabidiol. It's the CBD that scientists think modulates electrical and chemical activity to help quiet the excessive activity in the brain that causes seizures.
I've been telling my patients to cut.
Dr. Julie Holland is the editor of The Pot Book, A Complete Guide to Cannabis.
For a long time, the work on cannabis and epilepsy was sort of inconclusive. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. They couldn't quite figure it out. And it's only when they really started separating THC from CBD that they saw, definitively, yes, CBD seems to really stop seizures.
So the Figgies needed to find something that was rare, a strain of marijuana that was low in THC. Of course, they didn't want Charlotte getting stoned, but also high in CBD to treat her seizures. And that wouldn't be easy. Dispensaries and growers, they make their money off strains that are high in THC.
I'm Joel. I'm Josh.
No one knows that better than the Stanley brothers. Their family business is pot. And if you look at these clean-cut guys and what you see surprises you, don't worry. They've heard it all before.
When we round the corner, they're like, oh, wait a second. Did you finish high school?
They all not only finished high school, but also college, and in some cases, graduate school. Now, they are some of Colorado's biggest growers and dispensary owners. They produce up to 600 pounds of medical marijuana a year, and much of that marijuana is high in THC. But here, on their remote farm at this undisclosed location in the mountains,
It takes a lot of plants. We're allowed to grow 6 per patient.
they have been growing something different, something they call revolutionary.
So Greenhouse 1.
Greenhouse 1, yes. Welcome to paradise.
Behind closed doors and under tight security, we enter what the Stanleys call the Garden of Eden.
There's nothing like this in the world. This plant's 21% CBD and less than 1% THC.
It took years of crossbreeding plants to get to this point.
Instead of breeding up the THC, we've bred down the THC and bred up the CBD. And people said, you're crazy. Who's going to smoke that?
So why grow it then? Well, the Stanleys also believed in CBD's potential to treat many diseases. And they had seen it change lives before.
I always have 2 strains.
Meet 19-year-old Chaz Moore. He uses many different strains of marijuana, many of them high in CBD, to treat his rare disorder of the diaphragm.
My abs will, lock up.
That's why he's talking this way, almost speaking in hiccups, like he can't catch his breath. It's called myoclonus diaphragmatic flutter.
This fluttering here, it's annoying, but it becomes painful pretty quickly, I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, after 15, 20 minutes is where I can start to really feel it.
He's about to show me how the marijuana works. He's been convulsing now for 7 minutes.
How quickly do you expect this to work?
Within the first 5 minutes. And I'm done.
That's it.
That's it.
It was actually less than a minute.
Depending on the attack in the day, it'll work within the first couple hits.
Hear how his voice is completely different. That attack lasted 8 minutes. But some have lasted much longer and happen as often as 40 times a day. And like Charlotte, he had tried so many things before. By 16, Chaz was taking these powerful, addictive, potentially deadly narcotics and muscle relaxants daily, like Valium and morphine.
It would be safe to say that marijuana, what you have in your hand there, is better than all those pills for you in terms of treating what's going on?
Yeah, I'm not zombified. I've had 16, 17 attacks today, and I'm still sitting up talking to you. My first attack on all these, I'd be in the hospital.
I'm a firm believer that marijuana has actually saved my son's life.
Chaz's father, Sean.
His quality of life now is 1,000 times better than what it was when he was on the pharmaceuticals.
A quality of life that Paige Figge desperately wanted for her daughter, Charlotte. But she still had one hurdle to cross: convincing dispensary owners like the Stanleys to sell marijuana to a 5-year-old little girl.
When Charlotte's mother called my brother Joel, the brothers had a meeting. He said, tell us about this patient. She's 5 years old, he said. And we said, oh, no, we can't do that.
Why? It was the fear of the unknown. Charlotte was the youngest patient at the time wanting marijuana. Would it be too much for her? Or would it change her life forever? We'll find that out later. But first, learn more about what marijuana does to your kid's brain. and yours as well.
That's what I'm talking about. Y'all smoking or what? If you smoking weed, make some noise. Yeah.
April 20th, Denver, Colorado.
We like we smoke, we sing. Woo!
Tens of thousands from around the country and the world lighting up legally.
Happy Cannabis Cup, y'all.
For some, it's a lifestyle. For others, it's a lifeline.
We're working with the Lupus Foundation and rheumatoid arthritis.
But for all of them, I wonder, what was it doing to their brains?
Some of my patients call me pot doc.
Your patients call you pot doc?
Well, they never meet anybody who's as interested in hearing about their marijuana use as I am.
Dr. Stacy Gruber is serious about pot.
I want you to name the color and not to read it.
Okay.
I met her in her labs at McLean Hospital near Boston. She's using high-tech imaging to see what happens in the brain when you smoke.
When you first smoke, that is, you light up a joint, a spliff, a blunt, receptors, which are throughout the brain, respond. And these areas of the brain are responsible for things like pleasure, memory, learning, sensation, sense of time and space, coordination, movement, appetite, and other drives, shall we say. So it's sort of an all-over impact, right?
So reward, pleasure, hunger. You have this overall feeling of well-being, they say. That all sounds pretty good.
Right. It does sound pretty good.
And it's not just feeling good, but there's this phenomenon reported by many smokers over the years, especially famous artists, the ability to be more creative.
When you feel that high, there's sort of a release of dopamine, and your brain sort of has the ability now to perceive things slightly differently from the way you might have if you hadn't been smoking pot. What you really see is this reduction in inhibitory function.
Welcome, Dr. Gupta. Pretty spectacular.
Less inhibition. That's something that painter Amir says helps him be more creative. A successful artist, his canvases sell for up to $25,000.
It's my favorite way to work.
Using marijuana.
Yeah.
He's been painting for 14 years, smoking for even longer. He says it makes him feel more relaxed, but most importantly for him, he says it makes him less critical of his own work.
Stop worrying so much about this and that, and just sort of looking and being as present as possible.
Amir does caution that it's a delicate balance for him.
It would make me very apprehensive, as maybe a little paranoid, just too analytical.
You can get paranoid, you can have disorganized thinking, you get disoriented. It can be uncomfortable, it can lead to panic attacks or anxiety attacks in people.
How do you know when you've done too much?
Simple tasks become very frustrating, like mixing paint, and then just sort of get into this state of duh, you know?
Inhale.
And why that happens is exactly what Columbia University neuroscientist Carl Hart is investigating.
Exhale.
Research subjects in his lab smoke marijuana and then take a variety of cognitive tests.
The effects will be disruption in memory, disruptions in inhibitory control. They will become slower at cognitive functioning, a wide range of things. These effects are temporary, but they're pretty pronounced and they're clear.
And it's slowly becoming clear to scientists what part of the brain is most affected. It's the prefrontal cortex.
It's very important for planning, thinking, coordinating your behaviors. There are tons of marijuana receptors in this region. And we think that marijuana, particularly in the novice, can disrupt all of those behaviors.
An impairment that Hart cautions could be dangerous, especially when driving.
You may prematurely hit your brakes. You may prematurely hit the gas pedal, a wide range of things. You may make a turn without looking more carefully.
Look at this experiment done by CNN affiliate KIRO in Washington State. Subjects smoked marijuana and then drove. One was a daily medical marijuana smoker, and another, an infrequent weekend smoker.
Relaxed and buzzed,
The more the novice user smoked, the more trouble behind the wheel.
Watch yourself, watch yourself.
But interestingly, the habitual smoker didn't have as much trouble.
I wouldn't pull her off the road, no. No, not yet.
And that's something I witnessed firsthand driving around with 19-year-old Chaz Moore. The day that I spent with him, he had been smoking all day long.
Do you feel impaired at all?
No, I don't. I feel normal.
Turns out when you test people who have a lot of experience with cannabis, you don't see many disruptions. But if you test people who have sort of a limited history with cannabis, you can see some clear, pronounced disruptions.
Of course, no one thinks that driving when using marijuana is a good idea. But what scientists can't answer is if there is a safe legal limit, and if people who use marijuana daily as a medicine should be able to drive. How impaired are they? What is more clear, though, is the effect of marijuana on the young brain.
What we see is a very big difference in people who begin to smoke prior to the age of 16 and those who smoke after age 16, what we call early versus later onset.
Gruber's brain scans show that the white matter, those are the highways that help the brain communicate from one point to another, are impaired in those who start smoking early.
Maybe there's underlying white matter connectivity differences.
That's your concern, it sounds like, that those highways, those white matter highways, are just more disrupted in people who start smoking early.
That's what we see.
Perhaps not surprising, given what we know about the young developing brain.
That's a very delicate time in brain development, and that's not a good time to be taking any drugs.
Preliminary research shows that early onset smokers are slower at tasks, have lower IQs later in life, higher risk of strokes, and increased incidence of psychotic disorders. And while these studies are not conclusive, some scientists are still concerned because in 2012, 35% of high school seniors lit up. And that could mean a generation of kids with damaged brains. And many fear something else.
I never really told myself I needed help.
A generation of marijuana addicts. When we come back, the truth and the science behind what's being called a growing epidemic. And later, Charlotte's story, the first and youngest child to try marijuana in Colorado. This was the day Chaz Moore almost died. Pumped full of drugs like morphine, Dilaudid, Valium, to quiet a non-stop 48-hour attack.
I thought I was going to overdose, and yeah, it was pretty bad.
At his bedside, his father Sean watched his son go from being catatonic to what he calls high as a kite.
How high are you on the morphine?
I'm not high on.
I've watched friends of mine die from taking the same drugs that he took.
You see, Sean was a drug addict, and he had struggled for decades to get clean.
It was scary.
It was really important for him not to take these drugs if he could avoid them.
If he could avoid them. I know how addictive they are. I've seen it. It scared the hell out of me.
But Sean is not scared of marijuana, and neither is Chaz.
This right here, I don't get sick off of it. I can't overdose.
And Chaz is right about that. While there are fatal, accidental prescription medicine overdoses every 19 minutes in this country, there are virtually no reports of fatal marijuana overdoses. And it's perhaps one of the biggest reasons most people think pot is safe. In fact, a new study of children showed that by high school, only 1 in 5 think marijuana is harmful. That's the lowest number in more than 2 decades. And it's something we heard over and over as we traveled around the country.
Not really that harmful.
It has a lot of benefits. Not really too concerned about it.
I think it's safe if you're a safe person.
Probiotics are
But the experts we spoke to said there is more to the story.
There are people who compulsively smoke, who want to stop smoking, but they can't stop smoking.
In fact, 9% of marijuana users will become dependent. Now, that's not as high as other drugs, like heroin. 23% of users become addicted, or 17% with cocaine, or 15% with alcohol. But it's still approximately 1 out of every 11 marijuana smokers.
There's no longer any scientific debate that marijuana is not just psychologically addictive, but also physically addictive. So give me an update. How you doing?
Dr. Christian Thurstone runs one of Colorado's largest youth substance abuse treatment clinics. The number of marijuana addicts he treats has tripled in the last 3 years alone.
Literally, I cried about it. Marijuana is #1 on their list of priorities. They have dropped out of life.
Back in the day, I wouldn't feel like my day has really started if I didn't get high.
Joel Vargas started smoking when he was just 13. By 15, he was smoking more than a dozen times a day. He stopped skateboarding. He even dropped out of school.
I like getting high. I need to get high because my brain is telling me.
Adolescents, starting at about age 13, have a pretty mature brain reward center, so they can experience rewards and pleasures the same way adults can. But the problem with that is that their prefrontal cortex, which helps people think ahead, control their impulses, that's not fully developed until age 24. That explains why adolescents are much more vulnerable.
There's something else that addiction experts believe is likely happening in the brain. When you smoke pot, the feel-good chemicals that make up marijuana, called cannabinoids, remember them? They cause your brain to stop producing its own natural cannabinoids. When you stop smoking, you have no feel-good cannabinoids of your own. Until your body kickstarts production, you feel lousy. So many people smoke again to feel better. And today's marijuana could be more addictive. It has more of the psychoactive ingredient THC than ever before. Brain researcher Dr. Nora Volkov.
If you smoke a very potent marijuana, the 9-THC content is going to go very fast into your brain at a relatively high concentrations, and then that increases its rewarding effects and its likelihood of transition into addiction.
So how much stronger is it?
You see the barbed wire, obviously, on the fences.
Well, I traveled to Mississippi, where marijuana is illegal. But here, on the campus of one of the country's oldest universities, Ole Miss, a huge stash of marijuana is under lock and key.
This is our vault.
This is some pretty tight security. I mean, look at this door.
Mahmoud El Soli runs what's called the Marijuana Potency Project.
What's the potency of this?
This is about 8%.
For 3 decades now, his team has analyzed weed confiscated from drug busts.
This is 36% THC. You can smell it. It has a good aromatic, smell.
How much does this worry you? 36% THC, confiscated.
Very, very dangerous material. For someone that is not experienced in marijuana smoking, take some of this and they're going to go into the negative effects of the high amounts of THC, the psychosis, the irritation, the irritability, the paranoia, and all of this.
And while not all the plants are this high, there's no question he's seen a trend. In 1972, the average potency was less than 1% THC. Now, it's nearly 13%.
Are people becoming more obsessed with high THC marijuana?
I think so. They start out with a 0.5% or 1%, and they get a good high. And then as they continue to use that, it doesn't give them the same high anymore, so they seek either smoking more or higher potency material.
It happened to Joel Vargas. After a couple of years of smoking daily, Joel eventually ended up in rehab, where he faced mild withdrawal symptoms like irritability, insomnia, nausea.
It certainly isn't anything nearly as dangerous as abrupt discontinuation of alcohol. You know, for somebody like Joel, going into rehab is really about learning new behaviors, more than it is about sort of treating the physiological dependence or tolerance or withdrawal issues.
Joel's been clean now for 6 months, but these kinds of risks, they don't scare off Charlotte Figge's parents.
People ask us that a lot, like, how did you make that decision? It wasn't a decision.
It wasn't a decision.
It was the next viable option.
And some would say a radical option, marijuana for a 5-year-old. But it was an option they hoped would change her life forever.
Baby.
When we come back, Matt and Paige Figge finally give their Charlotte marijuana. The results are shocking. was January 2012. Afghanistan. About 7,000 miles away from his family in Colorado, Matt Figge received this video from his wife, Paige.
It's horrible seeing these videos when I'm deployed.
It was his 5-year-old daughter, Charlotte, seizing. Diagnosed with a severe form of epilepsy, she was having 300 seizures a week, each attack so severe it had the potential to kill her. They had already tried dozens of high-powered drugs.
We needed to try something else, and at that point in time, marijuana was that natural course of action to try.
At home in Colorado, Paige searched for marijuana high in CBD. That's the ingredient some scientists think helps seizures, and also low in THC. Remember, she didn't want to get her daughter stoned. She found a small amount at a Denver dispensary. The owner was surprised that anyone would even want it.
They said it's funny because no one buys this, you know. That was the general consensus. Nobody wanted it. It didn't have any effect.
Paige paid $800 for a small bag and took it home.
I had a friend that was starting a business on making medicine. And I said, can you help me extract the medicine from this bag of marijuana? I measured it with a syringe and squirted it under her tongue. It was exciting and very nerve-wracking.
Holding Charlotte in her arms, Paige waited. An hour ticked by, and then another, and then another.
She didn't have a seizure that day, and then she didn't have a seizure that night.
Did you sit there and look at your watch? And...
Right, I thought, this is crazy. And then she didn't have one the next day, and then the next day, and I thought, she would have had 100 by now. And I just thought, this is insane.
I remember how happy Paige was, like, it's really working. I can't believe it. Yeah, that was pretty amazing to hear.
It had worked. But in just a couple of weeks, the excitement was overshadowed by panic. Paige was running out of marijuana, and the dispensary didn't have any more of that particular strain. Even if there was more, the monthly price tag would have been astronomical. $2,000, and not a penny of it covered by insurance. But then Paige heard about the Stanleys, the 6 brothers, and their greenhouse of marijuana that is high in CBD.
I said, oh my goodness. He says, I don't know what to do with it. We're trying new things with it, but no one wants it. It's not sellable. I said, just don't touch that, because we need that plant.
At first, they didn't want to take the risk of giving marijuana to such a young child. But then they met her.
Tell me about the first time you met Matt, Paige, and Charlotte. I'm gonna get you misty-eyed.
Yeah, you get all of us crying when we start talking about that little girl.
The Figges had hit the jackpot, a steady supply of high CBD marijuana, and they only had to pay what they could afford.
People have called us the Robin Hoods of marijuana. They say that we sell pot so that we can take care of the kids and the truly less fortunate.
Charlotte was the first of those kids. Late spring 2012, she tried the Stanley Special Marijuana, and again, it worked.
I can't tell you what that means to us.
Get you, doesn't it, a little bit?
If it doesn't get you, something's wrong with you. She lived her life in a catatonic state. Now her parents get to meet her for the first time. What a revelation.
Yeah, kitty.
The child who had had 300 seizures a week was now down to just 1 every 7 days.
Pitter pat, tiptoe.
When I first met Charlotte, March of 2013, it was 1 year after that first dose of marijuana.
Achoo!
After almost 2 years on a feeding tube, she was now eating on her own.
Yellow?
She was talking, even walking.
Puppy.
Yeah, please, she said, please.
Go!
But these stories, they are not without their skeptics. One of the country's 2 hospitals dedicated to Dravet syndrome in Florida states at present there is no evidence that cannabidiol is effective for the treatment of epilepsy. The American Academy of Pediatrics also opposes cannabis, as does the National Institute on Drug Abuse.
It is such an amazing turn of events that it really can't be a fluke, but I do still wonder.
Do you still wonder, too?
Matt?
Hell no.
You know it's working.
It's working great.
You just look wonderful.
And Charlotte's doctor, Alan Shackelford, also agrees. Yet his commitment to medical marijuana has drawn criticism. He's even been called Dr. Feelgood.
How difficult is this for you to talk about as a physician?
We are typically conservative as a profession and probably as individuals. We want more proof, and cannabis doesn't have that.
And it's why he has traveled the world to look for researchers who might have the answers. And that took him to the place many call the medical marijuana research capital. Israel. It might surprise you, but actually research into cannabis and epilepsy started here in the 1970s, with studies that showed it could reduce convulsions in rats. Today, Shackelford is hoping to start clinical trials in humans there.
We need to understand it well enough that they won't be reluctant to at least give it a thought, at least try it.
And it's not just epilepsy, but researchers in Israel are studying a variety of illnesses. When we come back, what they're finding, up close, and an amazing look inside hospitals and nursing homes where patients are lighting up, courtesy of the Israeli government. As the sun was rising on the ancient city of Jerusalem, the final leg of our journey was just beginning.
There have been some great advances here, and I'm proud of that, obviously.
Dr. Boaz Lev is with Israel's Ministry of Health. Here, they have pioneered marijuana research. They were the first to isolate THC and CBD decades ago. And now the country's ministry licensed 10,000 patients to use marijuana medicinally and has approved more than a dozen studies to treat illnesses like PTSD, pain, Crohn's disease, even cancer.
Hopefully, this will prove to be the best medication. I really hope so. We're not there yet.
Answers might come from places like this. It's a state-run nursing home outside of Tel Aviv. Residents here are using marijuana for pain, loss of appetite, Parkinson's disease, and dementia. Moshe Root is one of those residents. He was 77 when he smoked his first pipe of marijuana. He's 80 now, and he smokes a couple of times a day. It's to help with the pain and the hand tremors caused by a stroke.
So it's a mixture of tobacco and marijuana.
He even decided to light up during our interview to stop his hands from shaking.
You're saying your hands are steady because of the marijuana?
It also helped ease a deeper pain hidden from sight. You see, Moshe is a Holocaust survivor. When his wife died a couple years ago, he was haunted by nightmares of his childhood, hiding from the Nazis. The marijuana, he says, took him out of the darkness.
You dream. You fly.
When you smoke?
Yeah.
There are 19 other patients here. Scientists at Tel Aviv University are now studying their progress, and they call the results outstanding, including weight gain, improved mood, pain and tremor reduction. But I can tell you as a doctor, it was my next stop that proved the most surprising. This is Israel's largest hospital, Sheba Medical Center.
You put up your medical cannabis.
Amashe is using marijuana to help him with the pain and nausea from chemotherapy.
Filling up the spoon, so that's your medicine inside there.
Of course. Now take it out, put up the valve.
And he's doing it inside the hospital.
How are you feeling?
Relief, first of all, in the muscle, in the leg.
And you're not worried about any potential damage to your body?
Not at all. The opposite, actually. I really believe I can be cancer-free for a long time if I continue, consume cannabis.
Yes, he said cancer-free. Very early studies on mice in Israel, Spain, and the United States are now showing the potential of marijuana to kill cancer cells. It's exciting research, but it is still in its infancy, and it's inconclusive. This program at Sheba is well established, and experts say a teaching tool for using marijuana in other hospitals.
Do you think this could happen in the United States?
I don't know that there's yet enough really concrete evidence of cannabis's benefit that's satisfactory, at least in that context. I think it's going to come.
But it could be slow going.
The FDA has been great at approving studies, but National Institute of Drug Abuse has been really stonewalling and blocking any studies looking at therapeutic effects of cannabis because that's not their mandate. Their mandate is to look at the harms of drug use.
It's very easy to blame an organization.
Dr. Nora Volkoff, who is the director of NIDA, says they are not standing in the way. She claims they are not the only government institute that approves marijuana research.
If you would come up with a grant that says, okay, this is going to be a treatment for drug addiction, then it would go to us. But if it's cancer, it goes to the Cancer Institute. If it is schizophrenia, it goes to NIMH. And so the institutes have a mission with certain diseases.
What is clear, there are bureaucratic hoops that most researchers simply don't want to jump through. Neuroscientist Carl Hart.
There are not many people studying marijuana. It's very difficult to get approval to study marijuana.
What's nice about Israel is that the government is helping the research to happen.
And it's research that could give hope to patients like Charlotte Figge.
I made it.
Scientists in Israel are learning that marijuana use might actually protect the brain, not damage it.
They've been able to show that it can decrease the amount of brain damage from head injuries in mice.
To be able to give a medicine after the injury to reverse some of the damage, that's huge.
I want to paint my nails.
You want to paint your nails? I'll paint your nails.
I literally see Charlotte's brain making connections that haven't been made in years. It's almost seeming to build her brain, where before it seemed broken.
And while scientists are still at the very early stages of knowing if this is actually happening, I can tell you it was remarkable to see her progress. In the 3 months since we first met her, we saw a change. She was now talking more.
Say puppy.
She's horseback riding.
Good girl.
She even rides a bike on her own. And the special strain made for Charlotte is now named for her. It's Charlotte's Web.
It is Charlotte's plant.
It's Charlotte's plant. Not anymore. Now it's for all the children.
More than 41 children are using Charlotte's Web here in Colorado. All of them are reporting significant seizure reduction. And there are dozens more on a wait list, hoping, praying that a plant could change their lives, just like it did for Charlotte.
I'm gonna get you.
You both seem very at peace.
I'm very at peace, yeah. Very peaceful.
We've been given a great life. You know, it's unfortunate that Charlie has this Dravet syndrome, but thank God we've got something now that's working. And she's doing so great today.
In his compelling documentary, Weed.
You've looked at the evidence.
There is real science now out there.
He was flat out wrong about weed.
A year-long journey that changed what many of us thought about marijuana, myself included.
I think, we've been terribly and systematically misled.
We used to only picture this. Then we showed you this. Medical marijuana, treating seizures, pain, dozens of other ailments.
Charlotte's doing amazing. Just better and better each month.
But we learned this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning.
I think we went from about 150 calls a month to over 4,000.
There are still so many issues to be addressed. The federal government says marijuana is among the most addictive drugs with no medicinal value. Many serious scientists say they're wrong.
It's a medicine.
It's the politics of pot, pitting policy against patients. Trapped in the middle, sick, qualified people who want medical marijuana but can't get it because it's illegal.
If you tried to go back to Ohio with Jordan's medication,
Will be arrested.
All for a plant that you're going to see can work wonders for pain in a grown man, MS in a woman at the peak of her life, and seizures in a little girl. We traveled the globe asking scientists, patients, and policymakers for a solution. I'm Dr. Sanjay Gupta, and this is Weed 2, Cannabis Madness. This time our journey begins in New Jersey, ironically called the Garden State. It's the summer of 2013, a quiet neighborhood diner about to become the site of a headline-making confrontation. Between a frantic father, Brian Wilson, and the outspoken governor, Chris Christie, all over Wilson's 2-year-old daughter, Vivian.
I was wondering what the holdup is. It's been like 2 months now, or a month and a half.
Because
it's very well documented.
Excuse me, these are complicated issues.
It's a very simple issue.
Listen, no, I know you think it's simple. And it's not.
It was a David and Goliath moment. You've got a governor who's one of the leading Republicans in the nation, and this dad who's got a little girl who he's desperately worried and in love with, who just wants to do the best thing for her.
You see, Brian Wilson's daughter, Vivian, was dying. Her brain continuously locked in seizures, and nothing had worked. The Wilsons were now pinning their hopes on medical marijuana. They'd read about marijuana on the internet, and they saw stories about it saving lives. Like little Charlotte Figge, whose story was told in our first documentary, Weed.
I remember I was actually at the gym on the treadmill, and I saw a preview. I was watching the TV. I was so excited because I knew that everything was going to change at that moment.
They hoped marijuana would rescue Vivian from the virtual prison she lives in, where bright lights, loud sounds, and patterns can all induce a seizure. That's why she wears that patch on her eye.
If Vivi could be blindfolded, she'd be seizure-free because it's everything. It's all visual stimuli. She can't leave the house.
Vivian, do you know this book?
Vivian and I first played together in her darkened, quiet, very controlled bedroom. It quickly became clear how tremendous a toll this isolation takes on Vivian. But also the entire family. No one here has a normal life, including Vivian's older sister, 4-year-old Adele.
Like every day on the way home from school, she's like, can we stop at the park? And I'm like, we can't stop at the park because Vivian's nurse leaves at 5 and we have to be home.
What would Adele say about that?
She'll say, we can't, when we pass the park, she says, those kids are at the park, but we can't go to the park because Vivian has seizures. And it like kills you, you know?
They're so severely affected.
New York University neurologist Dr. Oren Davinsky is Vivian's doctor. He's also one of the world's leading epilepsy experts.
I think for the families who have given Western medicine a really good chance, and there are a lot of them, and Western medicine has failed their children.
But the Wilsons now found themselves in the political crossfire of pot. Marijuana was legalized for medicinal use here in New Jersey right before Christie took office in January of 2010. It was done by his Democratic predecessor. But once in office, Christie blocked the legislation for more than a year. He eventually signed one of the strictest, most limiting medical marijuana bills to date. Just 6 approved stores in the entire state, and perhaps most damaging for Vivian, no edible forms of marijuana allowed, which was crucial. The only option then for this 2-year-old would be to inhale it.
Talk to Brian Wilson.
Protests erupted across the state. And that's why Brian Wilson took things into his own hands that day in August.
We've had our experts reach out to you. Have you heard from our doctors?
I have read everything that's been put in front of me, and I'll have...
It became known as the dust-up in the diner.
I mean, it was all over CNN. It was national news. It was like Libya, Vivian Wilson's father on the CNN home. I mean, it was crazy.
Please don't let my daughter die, Governor. Hi, how are you?
Nice to meet you.
Good to see you.
It's a battle these families understand better than anyone.
There's no hope left in Miami. There was nothing else to do.
Each of these families wanted medical marijuana for their sick children. They also fought to get it in their home states, but lost. So they moved to Colorado where it's legal. Desperate and determined, they've become known as medical marijuana refugees.
I came from Arizona.
We left a lot back in Alabama.
Unfortunately, we had to break the news to his folks that we're not going to be coming back to Texas.
More than 100 families moving to get the marijuana they had seen in our last documentary. It's called Charlotte's Web, named for the little girl we profiled. It's a plant that doesn't get you high, but is loaded with a chemical called cannabidiol, or CBD, which seems to help reduce seizures, even when nothing else has worked. It changed Charlotte's life.
Because the drier it is, it'll extract more.
Thousands of parents called to ask the growers, Josh Stanley and his brothers, if it could possibly work for their children.
And you tell them, potentially, it could. Nothing's for sure. And I said, well, unfortunately, you have to move to Colorado.
And the reason they have to move to Colorado is what?
Because anything that's grown in Colorado has to stay in Colorado.
It's the most absurd idea that we would have to do this to get medicine.
But it's the law. Marijuana is illegal federally. So even if you're prescribed it legally in a medical marijuana state, even if it works, even if it is your last hope, you're out of luck. You can't carry it across state lines. So for the Wilsons, completely uprooting their lives and moving seemed to be the only option to help Vivian.
It's the hardest thing in the world to have to do. We have all of our family here. We have our job. There's so much that we'd have to do.
But just weeks after the dust-up in the diner, just around the time the Wilsons allowed us to start filming their story exclusively, we received word that Governor Christie had eased his stance.
Madam Speaker, Senate Bill 2842 has received 70 votes in the affirmative, 1 in the negative, and 4 abstentions.
Eventually, the state of New Jersey did allow the edible form of marijuana after all. But the Wilsons still had another roadblock. They couldn't get their doctors to prescribe it.
There's a certain level within the epilepsy community of just fear that you could do more harm than good, and until you go through the standard process, you should be conservative.
And by standard process, he means scientific research. And as you're about to learn, that is nearly impossible to conduct here in the United States.
It's time to reform the system.
I love you so much. Have fun on the airplane.
Leaving people like the Wilsons in a painful and potentially deadly limbo. The exclusive journey to save their daughter when we come back. It's high noon at the Indispensary in Colorado Springs. Business is booming at one of the state's largest medical marijuana dispensaries. Customers run the gamut of ages and ailments.
Busy day. It's always a busy day, yes, sir.
Each strain, a different high. Each bud, a different benefit. Each leaf, treating a different ailment.
Everything from menthol floss to AK-47 to green crack.
Exactly, to blue
Creative
dream.
names. Did you name any of these?
No.
No.
The names are quirky, but the owner says this is serious medicine.
How hard is this to do?
Good luck. Good luck.
Huh?
It's tough. It requires persistence, patience, and luck.
This is Josh Stanley and his 5 brothers. They're a handsome, well-educated, tight-knit group, all working together to make millions in Colorado's cannabis madness.
So how have things changed here?
You're looking at new crop. This is a never-ending cycle.
The Stanleys sell many different kinds of medical marijuana. High THC strains tend to be the moneymakers, but they're now famous for growing a less profitable plant called Charlotte's Web. It's low in THC, but high in CBD, cannabidiol. Remember that name. It's the key therapeutic chemical doctors are using to treat everything from chronic pain to lupus to Crohn's disease and epilepsy.
So 80% of this farm is now a high CBD, low THC. I mean, this is the exact opposite of what people think of when they think of marijuana. This won't get you high.
You can set the whole hippie population of Colorado loose on this plant, and you're just going to be looking at a bunch of disappointed hippies.
The Stanleys are not concerned about disappointing hippies. They've seen this plant change lives. They have a brand new lab manned with scientists who are turning their plants into medicines. Brother Joel Stanley is in charge of that part of the business.
It wasn't a world that I knew, so we kind of had to dive into this and learn about how to make plant extracts.
Joel was reluctant at first to get involved. He'd avoided marijuana most of his life. But the spring of 2009, He was working in Texas on the oil fields when his oldest brother Josh asked him to join the new family business.
And I laughed because I thought it was just a foot in the door to legalization. I didn't think it was medicinal. The first 3 patients that I met were cancer patients who looked me in the eye and told me that if they didn't have the anti-nausea effects and the appetite stimulant and the help sleeping, that they wouldn't have survived chemotherapy. And I believe them.
That was sort of your time of conversion?
That was my turning point.
And now on this mountainside, they expect to grow more than 1,000 pounds of medical marijuana in 2014. Some is sold to smoke. Some is sold as an oil or a tincture to ingest.
So what we're talking about is literally taking this and turning it into this.
That's right.
The scientists here, some of whom have worked at major pharmaceutical companies, are focused on both making the medications and maintaining strict quality control.
We can test for pesticides, we can test for molds, mildews, we can test for residual solvents.
Testing for contamination. It's one of the biggest hurdles to creating a safe product. In fact, recent studies on the contamination of medical marijuana are pretty alarming. One paper in the Journal of Toxicology showed pesticide residue as high as 69% in a batch of medical marijuana. It's one of the things that concerns mainstream doctors about medical marijuana: safety, as well as uniformity and reliability.
The major issue that physicians have is in the consistency of the product. How do you know what the person is getting? And the answer is we don't.
Neurologist Dr. Edward Ma is the chief of Denver's Health Epilepsy Program. He is one of several mainstream doctors now researching the Stanley's marijuana after hearing about its dramatic results.
You know, my ears perked up. I was like, well, maybe this is something that we should be investigating.
For years, Dr. Ma steered clear of cannabis because the government classified it as illegal. Yet ironically, when he recently surveyed his own patients, 33% of them were already using medical marijuana.
I was just shocked at how many people were actually using it.
What did you expect before you got those numbers back?
I was guessing maybe 5–10%.
And that is part of the problem. Medical marijuana patients have self-medicated for years, anxious to get relief, but with very little guidance on how to do so. That's something that concerns the Wilsons.
I don't know if these people in New Jersey know how to grow these types of strains.
Yeah, none of the dispensary owners are growers. These are just people who had political connections who got the dispensary.
And by early October 2013, there was only one dispensary open in the entire state. They don't sell a high CBD strain. The Wilsons believe it could still be at least a year before they will. That's a year Vivian might not have.
Every seizure does damage to her brain, to her body, everything. How much longer do we wait?
They've got to do something. Not ready to move, they want to still try it. So they're going to leave their familiar neighborhood behind to see firsthand if the marijuana they've heard so much about could help Vivian.
Do you think this is going to work?
And for me, it has to work, because if it doesn't, then I don't know where that leaves us.
Just days later, Vivian Wilson gets ready for the trip of a lifetime. A trip filled with danger, since all the stimulation of a plane ride could induce seizures high up in the sky. Vivian's future and life is on the line.
I love you so much. Have fun on the airplane.
It was a trip that began with a tearful, anxious departure and fear for Vivian's fragile health. She suffers from life-threatening seizures. So much worry, yet thankfully this part of their journey was surprisingly smooth. With their grandmother and father by her side, Vivian was seizure-free.
Hey!
The long plane ride from New Jersey to Colorado ends with a warm welcome.
Hi, precious.
Vivian is finally going to try medical marijuana, cannabis, and the Stanley brothers have been working hard to get it ready.
Go ahead.
But just an hour after her arrival,
And Pat, Brian, she's going with her face.
Well, she sees him. Bring her over.
Vivian starts having seizures, one after the other. Brian rushes to get her anti-seizure medication. It's hard on Vivian and on Brian, and some of his doubts start to rush back in.
It's always stressful wherever we go. I have all faith that this is going to work, but with anything you try, there's always that nagging suspicion that we're going to be the ones that it doesn't work for.
Despite the rough night, the next morning begins with hope that relief is in sight.
This Vivian.
To meet the strict state standards, Brian establishes residency in Colorado by renting a small apartment. Vivian meets with 2 doctors for a thorough physical.
How many seizures per day has she?
Both doctors approve her need for cannabis and write recommendations for medical marijuana to treat her epilepsy.
And we're good?
Yeah.
By sunset, they're ready. Little Vivian has no idea what's about to happen.
Okay. Hey, Vivi, ready for your future? Nope.
That's it, right there. A tiny amount of oil squirted into her mouth.
Good job, sweetheart.
Now, they just watch and wait. Over the next 24 hours, Vivian's seizures slowly decrease.
Look what I got.
How's she doing?
She's doing really good.
To celebrate, a family picnic. Outside, filled with activity, balloons with patterns, decorations, and lots of sunlight. Any of these things could have previously induced a seizure. It's an emotional moment for a dad, watching his daughter finally have freedom.
She used to be able to do this outside, but not. This is what I'm starting on, yeah.
Come here.
Brian believes the marijuana is working. But as you're about to see, Vivian is by no means cured. After an hour in the direct sun, Vivian has a seizure. Brian rushes to inject the potent emergency rescue drugs that will stop the seizures, and then places an oxygen mask in case those same drugs stop Vivian from breathing.
She was out in the sun.
Yeah, we pushed it.
Now with the epilepsy rescue drugs still in her system, you can see for yourself just how powerful they are.
She's absolutely doped up right now, though. Like, watch her trying to walk, watch her trying to do anything.
This is difficult to watch, but it does raise this important point. The traditional drugs used to treat epilepsy can be more dangerous than cannabis. Vivian's doctor, epilepsy expert Oren Davinsky.
I think one of the reasons marijuana is probably safe is related to the cannabidiol receptors, which if you have too much stimulation or inhibition of them, they don't shut off breathing or respiration.
And that's key. The current potent epilepsy drugs impact many parts of the brain, including the brainstem. They can essentially shut off the body's vital functions if you take too much. Marijuana does not do that. And that's why it's virtually unheard of to have a marijuana overdose. It's one of the reasons so many doctors are starting to change their minds on cannabis. But we are talking about children, young children, and that's going to understandably raise concerns. The latest research shows that some strains of marijuana do have a profound effect on the brains of users under the age of 25.
THC in some good studies has been linked to psychiatric disorders, memory disorders in children under age 16. So even though it's low THC content, it's still THC is more potent than CBD, so there may be long-term side effects.
What do you worry about the most in the long run?
The fact that we don't understand the long-term effects of this medication in brain development.
These are tough choices, made even tougher when you uproot your whole life for marijuana.
I had to do a lot of fundraising and get a lot of friends' help to get us here.
So we left Daddy's at home in Cleveland and Big Sis.
They come from all walks of life. A stay-at-home mom from Ohio, an insurance salesman from Alabama, a nurse practitioner from Florida.
It's exciting to think about the opportunity for her, to hold her head up, to be able to look at us and say, Mom and Dad.
But now, they're trapped.
You can't take the medicine back to Florida, can you?
they would take my child away. I'm pretty sure that's my fear.
They would take your child away for giving him his medicine.
Yeah.
This is the problem I'm talking about between the federal and the state level. This conflict is really driving families apart.
I mean, that's just crazy.
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
I'm trying not to think of it at this point. I'm just trying to, get some quick results in Vivian so that we know this is the path to continue on.
And over the next couple of days, they see some startling results. Vivian goes from 75 seizures a day to just 10. The Wilsons are now more convinced than ever. They have to keep Vivian on marijuana. But how? Financially, they aren't ready to move here full time. And yet New Jersey doesn't have the resources to grow what they need. So as they head home, they don't know what the future holds.
We're just going to have to hope for the best in the meantime.
Their hope could lie with a brand new pharmaceutical.
Wow.
From these top secret fields overseas. An exclusive look inside when we come back. We're driving deep into the English countryside now, just a couple hours outside of London. We're on our way to visit GW Pharmaceuticals. They're a company that makes medicines from the actual marijuana plant. Now, although this is done with the express permission of the UK government, we did have to sign confidentiality agreements and cannot disclose exactly where we're going to be located. You see, marijuana is illegal in just about every part of this country, except for the secret labs that we're about to enter. Wow, this is pretty spectacular. Do you get used to the smell?
I'm not particularly partial to the smell, very much.
If you had smell-o-vision on your TV, you'd be overpowered by now. It's a lot of pot. This greenhouse is the size of a football field, and they have several more just like it throughout the United Kingdom. The lighting, temperature, humidity, all monitored by a top-secret central computer that keeps those conditions constant. And there are dozens of scientists regularly tending the plants.
This is probably the most TLC for a weed I've ever heard of.
One would hope so, absolutely.
Dr. Jeffrey Guy, who runs GW Pharmaceuticals, says it has to be this way because they're trying to do something no other pharmaceutical company in the world is attempting, turning the actual marijuana plant into a prescription drug.
When you look out at all of this, what comes to your mind?
I look at this and I think we can make generations of medicines over the next 25 or 30 years.
Medicines for illnesses like Alzheimer's, diabetes, PTSD, and epilepsy, and autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis and Crohn's. The key to making these medications is inside these simple-looking leaves, in understanding the hundreds of chemicals, some more therapeutic than others. Those are the cannabinoids.
In our preclinical research, we're able to say what each individual cannabinoid does, so that each one represents a potential new medicine for us. We can then breed into the plant the materials that will provide us with a range of beneficial effects.
Designer cannabis plants are then reduced to a whole plant extract. And that's crucial, according to the granddaddy of all marijuana research, Israel's Dr. Raphael Meshulam.
When they've tried to make drugs using certain compounds from marijuana, it's met with limited success. Why is it that when you take just certain compounds out of the marijuana and try and make a drug, it doesn't seem to work as well?
Well, one of the reasons possibly is because the THC works better when cannabidiol is there. So if you have both, it works better, as a matter of fact.
Meshulam calls it the entourage effect, and that's what GW is doing. Every extract will have all the plant's chemicals in it. The extract is then packaged as an approved prescription spray. In order to increase the chances of getting that approval, every step, from growing to harvesting to manufacturing, is all carefully controlled, regulated, and rigorously tested to strict standards, so that every plant, every extract, every dose is identical, safe, and effective. It is an expensive and painstakingly slow process. It has taken hundreds of millions of dollars and a decade to develop their first drug, Sativex, for the unrelenting pain and spasms brought on by multiple sclerosis.
Is this a place that you walk?
As a neurosurgeon myself, I was curious just how well this medicine could work. Teresa Pointer was diagnosed with MS in February of 2004. For years, she struggled with pain and exhaustion. She tried just about everything, but found the drugs prescribed to her were either ineffective or had awful side effects. Then one day in 2005, she read in the newspaper about clinical trials for a marijuana-based medicine.
Have you ever tried cannabis? I mean, what were your thoughts on it?
No. I mean, ever since I was a little girl, my mum had always said to me, you know, don't do drugs, don't do drugs.
But nearly wheelchair-bound, Teresa was desperate. She tried it, a spray to the back of her throat several times a day, even once during our interview. Her pain and muscle spasms are now well controlled.
So just the relief to be able to have a couple of sprays before I go to bed and feel comfortable enough to just go to sleep.
The risk of side effects are pretty low.
Neurologist Dr. Eli Silber prescribes Sativex for some of his patients.
Some people do feel slightly dizzy and lightheaded, if you want to call it slightly stoned. Some people might feel slightly tired with it.
But according to GW studies, only 6% of patients stopped taking the drug because of the side effects. More than 50% did get relief and continued on the drug. All of that makes it a potentially powerful medicine for the 2.3 million MS sufferers worldwide. It's now available in 25 countries, but not the United States, where it's still under investigation.
Why so much more stringent in the United States?
I think there is a greater level of rigor at all levels of regulatory inquiry in the US.
Like any drug in the United States, cannabis would have to go through rigorous testing, research, and approval by the FDA. But after that, things start to get tricky. You see, marijuana also needs the approval of other governmental agencies, like the National Institutes of Health and the Drug Enforcement Administration. This is, of course, difficult, if not impossible. Why? Because in the United States, marijuana is illegal and classified by the government as a Schedule I controlled substance. That means it is considered to be among the most addictive drugs and is not recognized as having any medicinal benefit. And that's why what I'm about to tell you is so ironic.
The irony is that the federal government has patented one of the important chemicals in the plant.
The government of the United States has a patent on a substance for medicinal purposes at the same time that they say it has no medicinal purpose.
Exactly.
Mayo Clinic researcher Dr. Michael Bostwick is talking about United States patent number 6630507. It's held by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services for the exclusive use of cannabinoids for certain treatments.
I was stunned, and it really feels to me like sort of a dog in the manger, that the federal government is sitting on this wonderful thing, and not letting anybody else do anything with it.
And when we went to the government to ask about it, none of the agencies involved would comment.
We're being handcuffed by the government, preventing us from doing the right trials.
In fact, a 2013 search through the U.S. National Library of Medicine revealed 2,000 recent papers on marijuana. But the majority of them explored the harm. Only 6% investigated the benefits. Many believe that's the result of a draconian system gone awry, resulting in marijuana becoming one of the country's most controlled substances. And many people believe that has to change. But it was one of the experts calling for that change that surprised me the most, Dr. Nora Volkov. She's the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. That's the very agency that many say has blocked a good deal of cannabis research.
If the researchers feel that this is an impediment to them doing actually scientific work, this is something that should be addressed.
On the front lines of that battle, the son of a political dynasty. Coming up, how this anti-drug crusader is fighting to get cannabis drugs to patients like Vivian.
Adele, can you put some shoes on?
It's early November 2013 at the Wilson home.
Vivi.
Just a few days earlier, Vivian's parents were surprised by a call from one of the only 2 dispensaries currently open in the entire state of New Jersey. They say they have a strain of cannabis that is low in psychoactive THC and high in therapeutic CBD.
Good morning.
After a year of fighting Governor Chris Christie,
This is Vivian.
and then months searching for doctors to prescribe cannabis,
She has seizures, correct?
the Wilsons are finally getting marijuana in their hometown.
Here.
And once they pick up the cannabis at the dispensary, they're confused.
It's 0.13% THC and 0.13% CBD.
Okay, why don't you go in and ask?
This isn't like picking up a standard prescription at the pharmacy. There are no standard doses or federal guidelines.
Your CBDs are 3 point.
CBDA.
Right. That's the one that you want.
CDB.
But they leave uncertain, not knowing exactly what they're getting. And here's another problem. What they get at the dispensary are leaves Vivian can't use.
And how many grams did we say we were going to do?
Half ounce.
It's up to her parents to make medicine out of those leaves. For that, they're using this glorified crock pot to activate the plant and turn it into an oil.
So once we have oil, we still don't know exactly what the ratio is because it's not going to be exactly what this says because it just went through this heating process.
It's trial and error. Something we heard from so many medical marijuana patients.
Is what matches.
I do a mixture of THC, CBN, and CBD.
See that great God.
Frank Bianco had to experiment with many different strains of marijuana to find the right kind to treat his chronic pain and arthritis from an old football injury.
If I'm experiencing extreme pain in my knee and I want to get medicated faster, I'll do a dab of hash oil. My body's exhausted, my knee's going to be sore, maybe a little swelling on the joint, maybe I'll sit down and smoke some flower.
Prescribed painkillers had made him sick, so he was desperate and willing to try something new.
Literally within 15, 20 seconds, the pain just went away. It was gone, absolutely exited the body.
Turns out the most common use for medical marijuana is pain. Early studies suggest that cannabis binds to receptors in the brain and the body to reduce inflammation and provide a buffer against pain. Yet according to Stanford-trained Dr. Margaret Getty, there is no one set standard cannabis treatment for pain.
So patients are kind of let loose in the sense that they have to try things and find out which strain works, and it might be different at different times.
Frank now works in the Stanley's lab, where he helps to make the medicines that he takes morning, noon, and night. A variety of different strains. He says his pain is gone, and he functions well. It's a mix that works for him.
Is it risky to be doing the trial and error process?
There are some risks. If you don't know your baseline for what milligram, your edibles that you can ingest, if you ingest too much, I mean, you could pass out.
Some of the stories I've heard have been people who followed recipes, and I've had children admitted to psychiatric emergency rooms, psychotic from the marijuana product.
I'm good, how are you?
And that is why Davinsky feels that job number one is to make medical marijuana safe, reliable, and effective. One way to do that is through research, which is why since the summer of 2013, he's been trying to begin the first ever United States research trial on GW's new cannabis-based epilepsy drug. But the hurdles have been nearly insurmountable.
If you're trying to look at the potential medicinal benefits, it's very hard to get funding.
After many months, Davinsky was able to secure funding and approval from his hospital, New York University. But getting the government, specifically the FDA, the DEA, and the Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement to sign off was nearly impossible. One of their biggest issues was security.
So as part of this, you had to have a safe put in.
This is new and only for this project.
A 1,200-pound safe, watched by multiple security cameras and alarm systems, all for a drug so low in THC that it can't get you high. And even with that, Davinsky is still waiting for final federal approval.
The failure of the federal government through its regulatory arms, DEA, FDA, and the like, has led to a public health debacle.
Patrick Kennedy, with his deep political connections and famous name, is pushing the feds to fast-track cannabis research.
They ought to get at it quickly, that's my view. FDA,
FDA.
the federal government, they ought to just get it done. We just need a greater urgency to this issue overall.
It's a bold statement for Kennedy, a recovering addict who's been outspoken that making medical marijuana legal in any way is dangerous, that more children will be able to access it, and more smokers will become addicted to it. Now he thinks the only way to remove that risk is to have all medicinal marijuana products federally regulated, rigorously studied, and strictly controlled.
I think making this truly a medicine, as opposed to forcing people to go on the street and try to buy something that they can't determine whether it is what it says it is.
But he understands why extremely sick patients want marijuana now. Remember, his father, Ted Kennedy, died of brain cancer, and his brother lost his leg to cancer.
I wouldn't have begrudged any member of my family with cancer, and they've all had cancer. Anything that would have mitigated the chemotherapy.
It's why Kennedy is meeting with everyone from the FDA to the White House to speed things up. But it takes time.
Ginger green?
Time the Wilsons don't have. They're finally going to try their new homemade cannabis oil.
We weren't able to get it tested or anything, so we really still have no idea what it is, which is why we have to be really cautious.
Behind closed doors, Brian tries it to make sure he doesn't get high. He doesn't.
Open up.
So Vivian is next. It doesn't work. Nothing in New Jersey seems to work for them. Vivian's seizures won't stop. Is moving the only option left for the Wilsons? The Wilsons' optimism is fading as fast as the falling February rain. They've rented their house, packed up their lives, finally headed to Colorado.
We figured there'd be a way to make it work.
It's crazy. It's just crazy that the program is such a failure.
All right. That's Vivian's nurse screaming for help. Vivian is having a bad seizure.
It's okay, Vivi. I know. Did it hurt?
She's got now these welts. She's having afternoon seizures. Something's not right.
It would be one of Vivian's last seizures in this home. Soon after, a house once filled with life is empty.
All right.
The Wilsons are leaving everything behind.
Bye, eyeless snowman.
When you look at some of these situations, families uprooting their lives, moving to Colorado, what goes through your mind? Somewhat as a doctor, but just as a citizen.
I think it's a strange point we have. I think that these people can't get access for the most severe cases to something that might be very helpful for their child, might even be potentially life-saving for their child.
Something Davinsky's hoping to change. He's finally gotten the government green light to start research trials on GW Pharmaceuticals' cannabis-based epilepsy drug. It's too late for Vivian, but not for the hundreds of children in the trials.
It is exciting to be at this point in medicine where, you know, we're going to hopefully in the near future get some answers about a drug that's been part of our species' history for thousands of years.
But those answers won't come immediately. In the meantime, the Stanleys aren't slowing down.
Oh, it looks really good.
They finally succeeded in getting Charlotte's Web out of Colorado and into the hands of patients in California.
Jaden, you got your medicine.
How about splitting families up?
Now the brothers have their sights set nationally in states like Oklahoma.
Don't make them pick up and have to move to a state like Colorado.
In fact, 15 more states are now considering legalizing medical marijuana.
There are other people in this room who need the immediate gratification of that drug.
The ever-growing support of mainstream medicine doesn't hurt. In a recent poll of nearly 2,000 doctors, 76% said they're in favor of using medical marijuana for a needy patient. Now, 6 medical marijuana states have expanded their laws to allow card-carrying medical marijuana patients to bring cannabis medicine into their home state. Yet unfortunately for the Wilsons, New Jersey is not one of them.
It will not happen on my watch, ever. I am done expanding the medical marijuana program.
Literally the same hour he said that, our friend's daughter was taken off a ventilator after a 26-hour seizure.
15 months old. I heard that.
And you're like, yeah, that could be Vivian, you know?
Tuesday, February 25th, Denver, Colorado. Brian is setting up house, unpacking boxes, picking up a 2-month supply of Vivian's new cannabis medicine.
It'll be $667.37 for the total.
Everything's in place when Vivian, Megan, and Adele arrive a few days later.
Say hi.
Oh, it was. After settling in, Vivian's ready for her first dose.
So this is it, huh? Yep. It's been a long road.
Yeah, it really
to
has.
get that in your hand like this.
It really has.
She's a little tired, but ready.
Have you take some medicine?
The first of many doses, the beginning of a new life.
You okay? I'm so happy with this neighborhood, and I needed something to make this really positive. I needed to be somewhere that I was going to just absolutely love.
And create new memories. Yet there is always the constant reminder of everything they left behind.
We're stuck here.
Vivian can't leave this state as things stand now.
Right. She can't cross any borders. And they're just not going to, the grandparents aren't going to get to see their grandchildren much. And it's really sad.
In the midst of the sadness, a realization that the sacrifice might have meaning.
Was this a battle that was won?
Clearly we're here now. Vivian does not have what she needs in New Jersey, so in that respect we didn't win, but there's a conversation going on and people are talking about medical marijuana a lot more. How great!
And for the Wilsons, other patients and dedicated scientists, all who believe this plant might be able to change lives,
Really, it's our new house!
that is a victory. You're watching a growing revolution. For 2 years, we've reported from the front lines of a battle between those who say marijuana saved them,
The children and I have my husband and father with us.
the doctors who want to prove it,
We had to demand that this plant be allowed to go through the drug development process of the FDA.
and federal agencies that have stood in the way.
That was extremely demoralizing to me.
At stake, the ability to use marijuana as a regulated prescription drug. Some say it's the only thing that works. A veteran and a stay-at-home mom suffering from PTSD, a painter with chronic pain, a truck driver with Alzheimer's. We are in the midst of a marijuana revolution. Scientists are poised to prove marijuana can change lives.
This is high times in marijuana research. It really is.
And for our elected leaders as well.
This bill that we are introducing,
The tide may be finally turning.
Our drug laws in this country as a whole need a revolution of common sense and compassion.
I'm Dr. Sanjay Gupta. This is Weed 3, the marijuana revolution.
I just went every day and sat by his bedside, and they told me that he'd wake up the next day, and he didn't. Then he didn't wake up the next day, and he didn't. He was 5 days in intensive care while I held vigil over his bedside. It was a very difficult time. I don't like to even really go there.
Chrissy Kernan doesn't want to go back to that day in 2011 when her husband Sean overdosed on prescription drugs.
It was the most terrible and horrifying thing I've ever been through.
Did you want to die?
I wouldn't say I just wanted to end it that second. I wanted to end, I wanted to stop.
Sean Kernan wanted it to end because the drugs he hoped would save him were killing him.
I couldn't stick on anyone and I just wanted to end, so I did something that, thank God, it wasn't permanent.
22 United States veterans kill themselves every day. Sean was almost one of them. Like many vets, he was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, also called PTS. For Sean, it was the U.S. Army, the jungles of Panama. He saw too much after the U.S. invasion, when riots, ambushes, and casualties were a regular occurrence.
And there's the sad times, you know, losing friends and people who you served with, and you start to question everything.
Questions that lingered when he got home. Despite having a beautiful wife whom he loved very much, 4 kids, a lucrative career in banking, Sean's life was full of darkness. He was prescribed dozens of different medications to help his sleep, to decrease his anxiety, to try and curb his depression. But none made it better. Most made it worse.
You can imagine how awful this situation is for vets. How you've overcome the symptoms and how
Dr. Sue Sisley, a psychiatrist, has been treating veterans with post-traumatic stress for decades.
There's this huge constellation of symptoms, everything from insomnia to anxiety to flashbacks, and each one of those target symptoms generally would receive another prescription. They end up getting stuck on 8, 10, or 12 different medications, and suddenly they're like zombies. There's just a few meds on the market that work, and even those are really inadequate.
But there is one medication that holds a lot of promise.
Marijuana is excellent for PTSD.
Rick Doblin is a researcher and also has a doctorate from Harvard. He's been trying to study marijuana for decades.
One of the surprising things about marijuana is that it suppresses dream recall. For people that are traumatized and have nightmares, the opportunity to have a good night's sleep without remembering their nightmares can be fundamentally transformative. Also, marijuana tends to focus people's attention on the here and now, and that's also really important for people that are carrying the trauma from the past into the present.
If all of that was true, it sounded like marijuana could be an ideal treatment for PTSD. Yet understandably, there are many skeptics. Dr. Sue Sisley was one of them.
I was really stunned when more and more patients were coming out of the shadows and disclosing to me that they were having some useful experiences with this marijuana plant.
When you use marijuana, what happens to the PTSD?
They relax me and they help with my muscle spasms and my pains, and they make me sleepy, so they help me when I'm getting closer to bedtime.
But Dr. Sue Sisley would need more than just stories. She needed scientific proof that marijuana eases PTSD. She wanted to study this plant like you would any other medication.
We had a duty as medical professionals to demand that this plant be allowed to go through the proper drug development process of the FDA.
So Dr. Sue Sisley, the skeptic, and Rick Doblin, the believer, joined forces and started their crusade in 2009.
That's what we're hearing from most of these vets, that they really want 2 different kinds.
Their goal, to investigate this simple but profoundly important question. Could marijuana help save veterans like Sean Kernan?
The veterans are saying they want an activating strain for the morning and then they want a sedating strain at night.
Problem is, they first applied to the federal government for approval in 2010 and were rejected. Then again in 2012, but were delayed for years by government bureaucracy.
That was extremely demoralizing to me. It was just frustrating.
I can understand some concerns about inefficiency and some cumbersomeness.
FDA Deputy Director Douglas Throckmorton.
For marijuana, 3 agencies are involved in making sure that you're available to get the marijuana and then able to conduct a trial.
He's talking about the Food and Drug Administration, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And if you're a privately funded cannabis study, like Sisley and Doblin's, you also have to get the approval of the United States Public Health Service. It's a lot of government red tape. And it's an issue that we reported on in our earlier documentaries. Weed. It was a Schedule I controlled substance. The government was saying it had no medicinal value.
We're being handcuffed by the government, preventing us from doing the right trials.
That's from Weed 2, Cannabis Madness. Rick Doblin believes the right people were watching because just 4 days after that documentary aired,
I got this letter saying that they had approved the study. It was fantastic. I mean, I was elated.
How big a deal was that? Some have called it a watershed moment in marijuana research.
Yeah, I believe that. And not because of some reevaluation of the risks and benefits of marijuana. It was because of changes in public perception.
For years, decades really, there's been hardly any United States research into the benefits of medical marijuana. On the contrary, most of the research focused on the harmful effects of the plant. Now, nearly 5 decades after it was deemed illegal, we are seeing history unfolding. The beginnings of a marijuana revolution.
FDA's official position is we want that drug studied. We want marijuana studied to decide its safety, its efficacy, its reliability, and we want to have that done as quickly as we possibly can.
That's music to the ears of veterans like Sean Kernan, who had to be convinced that marijuana could be the right option for him.
I talked to some people who weren't the stereotypical, persons who smoke marijuana. They were highly successful, highly motivated people.
He was once suicidal, but Sean now has hope. Hope that comes from this plant and from that new study, which might prove its benefit once and for all. When we come back, first step, getting their hands on the precise strains of research-grade marijuana. It would prove harder than Sisley and Doblin could have imagined. Oxford, Mississippi, the middle of the campus of Ole Miss. This was our first visit here 2 years ago, spring 2013.
I can't remember the last time we actually grew more than an acre.
Since the 1970s, this field has been the only place in the United States where scientists can get marijuana to dispense and research. The reason? To control the quality and distribution, all the way from the soil to the study.
This is the place where the marijuana is grown for federal research, and there's nothing in the fields. And there hasn't been for 6 years, you say?
That's correct. The last time we grew was 2007.
Mahmoud El Soli is the farm's director.
We are not growing because there is not much demand for the material that we already have.
Why isn't there more demand? I mean, this is something that a lot of
No research protocols, no research proposals, no requirement for the material.
But that was then. This is now. Nearly 2 years later, there is acre upon acre of marijuana. Ever wonder what a revolution looks like? A lush field of green for scientists. Scientists like Rick Doblin and Sue Sisley, who hope to get research-grade marijuana from these fields for the first ever federally approved clinical study to see if marijuana can treat the symptoms of PTSD.
I have to say I'm kind of stunned because, I think we were standing pretty much in the same spot and there was nothing here.
Exactly, yeah.
A year and a half ago.
Exactly.
Are you as surprised as I am?
To be honest with you, yes.
In the last year alone, the federal government has increased their production of pot by 30-fold, from just 46 pounds to 1,400 pounds. The government anticipates studies on everything from cancer to pain to epilepsy, and they want to have the marijuana ready to push science forward.
NIDA will give the marijuana, and if we don't have it, we'll have to grow it.
Dr. Nora Volkov is the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. They're the agency in charge of the field and responsible for dispensing marijuana for government-approved research.
We try to anticipate what researchers are going to need. And so we had, based on that, expanded our production.
Production of plants high in THC, the psychoactive part, plants high in CBD, the therapeutic part, and plants that are a combination of both. But one of the precise strains, the precise dose that Doblin and Sisley need, one that they believe might help save Sean Kernan, is not here yet. As part of our investigation, we learned that particular strain is available from other growers in the United States, but those farms cannot provide it for this federally approved study. Doblin and Sisley will have to wait for the grow at Ole Miss.
When Rick Doblin got his study approved back in March, there were specific strains, as you know, that he wanted.
Yes.
Did you have the strains for him at that time?
No, if I had, I would have delivered. You have to develop the strains, you have to get the right material, the right composition, and then you have to propagate it and produce the final product.
And all of that takes time, causing potentially deadly delays.
Our focus has to be what's best for the patients. How do we get this available to the patients, many of whom are committing suicide because of PTSD?
While Rick Doblin waits for his cannabis to be grown,
Let me just have a quick listen to your breathing.
this man doesn't have to. Ole Miss already had the strain that oncologist Dr. Donald Abrams needed for his newest study.
So remember, this is a two-part experiment.
And what he is doing is yet another sign of the revolution.
You put up your medical cannabis.
It's something we first saw in Israel 2 years ago.
Filling up the spoon, so that's your medicine inside there.
Of course.
And never thought we'd see in the United States. A patient using marijuana, like this, in a hospital room.
It's unique, it's different. I never thought I would be smoking weed in the hospital.
This is San Francisco General, an academic teaching hospital that, because of Dr. Abrams, has a stash of marijuana in their pharmacy. It is stored next to all the other medications.
Get ready?
And Abrams is using it to see if it can relieve chronic pain in patients with a rare blood disorder. Janelle Lachose is a painter. She was also born with sickle cell anemia and has been in pain for as long as she can remember.
You can exhale now.
She says marijuana makes her nearly pain-free.
How long after you smoke do you start to have some sort of relief of your pain?
Instantly. It's like instantly.
Within minutes?
Yeah, a couple minutes afterwards, you feel the relief of pain.
Janelle's in the study because she wants to know for sure, is marijuana safer and more effective than powerful painkillers and narcotics?
With marijuana, even though I may be buzzed, I can interact with life more so than with pills.
Treating pain is the most common use for medical marijuana. It may be the anti-inflammatory effects or even the dulling of pain receptors. Regardless, this study could prove to mainstream medicine what millions of medical marijuana patients already believe, that a plant may be a better pain treatment than the powerful pills that are most commonly prescribed.
Do we ever get to a point where we say, look, it's a medicine like so many other medicines out there?
I was just going to tell you, I always used to say not in my lifetime, but now I'm becoming a little more cautious because who knows? Let's just wait and see.
Wait and see. That's been a mantra for decades when it comes to pot. But for Rick Doblin and his veterans, the time for waiting is over.
The U of A assistant professor now believes that...
And yet they're about to be faced with shocking news that could put the whole PTSD study in jeopardy.
She's the University of Arizona researcher making national news for her study on marijuana and its impact on veterans with PTSD.
As the sun rises in Phoenix, a battle is heating up at the University of Arizona. June 27, 2014, nearly 4 months after the revolutionary PTSD and marijuana study was approved.
HR notified me just a little before 5 o'clock on a Friday.
The University of Arizona has fired Dr. Sue Sisley.
I was stunned because they stripped me of all of my work.
Her work, studying medical marijuana.
It's so disheartening for all these veterans who stood shoulder to shoulder with me.
Her termination became national news.
Veterans are demanding that Sue Sisley be allowed to continue her work.
First of its kind pot study has now hit a major snag.
A snag because without a job, Sisley's historic study is without a home.
Let me ask about what's going on right now.
I spoke to her soon after her dismissal.
What do you think's happening?
I think Arizona legislature is dominated by several very extreme thinkers who are opposed to this type of research. Even though this is an FDA-approved study, it's a randomized controlled trial, the most rigorous science we can conduct in the U.S.
I can say that the University of Arizona is not bound to political pressure either on research or any employee.
Chris Sigurdsson is the spokesman for the University of Arizona. He insists Dr. Sisley's termination had nothing to do with marijuana research.
What did you think when you heard that news?
Anger.
Sean Kernan is angry because he knows what's at stake: the lives of thousands of veterans every year.
How important are those scientific studies to you?
It makes me speechless, which is something that doesn't happen a lot, that as a society, as a university, as Arizona is, as a country that says we love our vets, we have 22 veterans killing themselves a day.
Sean is particularly certain marijuana could have saved some of those lives, because in some ways, it has already saved him. After his drug overdose in 2011, he turned to cannabis as his last resort. And now, he vaporizes with it every day.
That's it.
The symptoms of PTSD, the anger, the irritability, when you take this, how does it make you feel? How does it address those symptoms?
It allows your brain to get back into a more healthy, normal pattern of behavior versus just spiraling worse and worse out of control.
Here's how scientists think cannabis can work. People with PTSD have an imbalance in their brain. Too many receptors associated with intense emotions like fear and anxiety, and not enough of a chemical that binds to these anxiety receptors to keep them calm and in check. Marijuana is filled with a chemical that can bind to these receptors and help restore balance to the PTSD brain. A balance that is helping Sean Kernan turn his life around.
We really came to the conclusion that it was really the medicine for him.
It seems very effective.
It does seem very effective.
But for Sean, it's trial and error. How much to use, when to use, or even the best strains. And how will it affect him long term? That's why the studies are needed.
How much does it concern you that there's not a lot of science behind this, that it hasn't really been studied, at least not in this country?
If he wasn't doing this, the fear is he wouldn't be here. So if there are some side effects that we're going to have to deal with down the road that haven't been studied yet, I figure we'll take that when it comes. But for now, the children and I have my husband and father with us.
I want to get two things. One is like when I had that morning anxiety that I can...
Sean is lucky. Cannabis is a legal treatment for PTSD in California.
I would recommend like a bubba push for you during the day so you can actually still do things and function.
And he has enough money to buy his marijuana. It's not covered by insurance. But so many other veterans simply don't have that option. And the Veterans Administration hospitals cannot prescribe medical marijuana because it is illegal, federally, a Schedule I controlled substance. None of that is likely to change until research like Sisley's proves that cannabis is an effective, tested, mainstream medication. So to help other veterans, Sean is out front.
The administrative appeal for Dr. Sue Sisley, and then a letter from a veteran.
Protesting and fighting to get the PTSD study back on track.
I am going to find a home for this work, whether it's at the U of A or not. I feel such a deep sense of obligation to these veterans and to making this research happen.
So Sue Sisley is about to take a big gamble.
This is amazing.
The chances when we come back. Here in Las Vegas, medical marijuana is still a gamble, but also a potential jackpot for Dr. Sue Sisley.
They've been courting us since the day my termination was announced. Sue Sisley.
The future of her study hinges on finding a research site, like the University of Nevada, Las Vegas.
Without having a specific office, you can't even get a DEA license. Without a DEA Schedule I license, I can't purchase NIDA study drug.
Las Vegas would be ideal. Progressive politics, a budding medical marijuana community, and lots of veterans. Veterans who are fighting a battle on the home front and losing. Sean Kernan knows their pain.
When you see these younger soldiers coming back now, how worried are you about them?
Heartbroken, really. The stories I've heard and the stories I've seen firsthand from the medication regimen these kids are being put on that's addicting them to opiates.
It's senseless, really, especially when you consider that a simple plant could save them, and a scientific study could prove it. So Cicely soldiers on, hoping the Vegas odds are with her. And while she waits, nearly 3,000 miles away in Boston, another study, another seed of the revolution is just getting planted.
It's the most exciting time I can think of, really, for marijuana research. This is high times in marijuana research. It really is. What I need you to do is identify the number that's different, okay?
Harvard University's Dr. Stacy Gruber has been researching marijuana since the early 1990s. They call her the pot doc.
Same scanner.
We first met her 2 years ago when she was researching the possible damage of recreational marijuana to the brain. Now she's also set her sights on the possible benefits of medical marijuana. Massachusetts, as it turns out, is the perfect sort of place for this study because they just legalized medical marijuana. Gruber's goal is to study new patients who have never used cannabis.
Our goal was to look at these folks before they started using medical marijuana, and then 3 months in, 6 months in, and a year. Primarily to look at frontal executive functions, because that's really the big question.
That question, how does medical marijuana impact brain function longer term?
And all I want you to do is name the blocks of color for me as quickly as you can.
Before and after they start medicating, patients will take cognitive tests.
Green, red, blue, blue, green, red.
And here's what's revolutionary. They're going to have their brain scanned to chart the change. For the first time, we will see what your brain looks like on weed.
Nearly half the country now has medical marijuana laws on the books.
Right.
This is happening, and yet one of the most fundamental questions remains unanswered.
Right.
That's what you're trying to do.
I'd like to see what it looks like from beginning to the end.
Amelia Taylor, she wants to know as well. 34 years old, mother of 3. She lives in the suburbs of Boston.
I just pour a little bit in, like that.
Amelia is also a daily user of marijuana. Surprised? So were we.
How long would that last you then?
That would be my dose for the day.
She has been using this plant for relief. You see, Amelia, like Sean Kernan, has PTSD. In her case, she was a first-hand witness to an attempted murder of a close friend.
I felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt panic. I felt just very afraid.
You didn't expect that you'd have this sort of reaction to it.
Oh, no, no.
A reaction that turned her into a hermit, sheltered in her house, her bed, absent from her life as a wife and a mother.
I felt like my mind was being held hostage.
Were you suicidal?
I can't say I didn't feel that way.
Like so many we've heard from before, the potent drugs prescribed for her didn't help.
That's how I came across the cannabis, because I felt like I had tried so many things to no avail.
Church-raised and homeschooled, Amelia was taught that marijuana was evil.
What do you have that helps just like during the day for anxiety?
Sativa. But now she decided it was necessary. She joined Dr. Gruber's study.
Okay, so just like we talked about, we'll do a little bit of setup scanning.
Knowing they'd monitor her progress. And it gave her the confidence to buy and try cannabis for the first time in the fall of 2014.
I felt really relaxed and really happy. I felt like joyful. It was such a weird experience for me because I just hadn't felt that way in a while.
And it would only get better. Amelia got her life back.
Oh, you were too quick. I just noticed myself breathing during the day. Thought I wasn't holding my breath. I noticed I was less startled. There'd just be these constant moments of like, wow.
And in just a short time, we will take a peek at Amelia's brain to see what cannabis has or has not done and get clues as to why it seems to be helping her PTSD. Clues that Rick Doblin, just miles away in another part of Boston, is also determined to find. The precise strain Doblin and Sisley believe could quiet and heal the brains of people with PTSD continues to grow. It is late fall, and harvest is about to begin.
So how many of these plants have Rick Doblin's name on it?
He has his name on the 3 plots.
But as they are about to learn, starting a revolution can be tough. Even if they can get the medical marijuana, they still need to get DEA approvals and a final study location, because Las Vegas also said no.
So for the next couple of years, we'll do
Their journey is about to have some serious ups and downs. But all eyes are on another equally revolutionary study, a study that could impact all of us. Could marijuana, the drug associated with short-term memory loss, in fact save the minds of millions suffering with Alzheimer's? It may not look like it, but Mike Dobson is trying to save his brain.
Clears things up for me a little easier than it was before.
A few years ago, Mike was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Like every other patient, he was told there was no cure, very little treatment, and that he would get progressively worse. He became forgetful, yes, but also angry, isolated, disoriented. He would just wander.
You don't know which way to go or what to do, or it's just being lost. Totally.
He was very depressed, really down. In that one, sweetie.
Paula Dobson believes marijuana helped improve her husband's life.
His memory's still iffy, but he laughs, he can communicate. It's like we have the old Mike back for a while.
Dobson is part of a population using marijuana to treat the symptoms of Alzheimer's, like mood swings, irritability, and disorientation.
We're looking for more of an upper, euphoric feeling, okay.
And now, researchers think they may have figured out how cannabis might be helping.
That's the presidential kush. That's got about 20% THC.
If they are right, it could mark one of the most significant stories in this whole marijuana revolution. In this Florida lab, scientists have discovered that low doses of THC slow down the buildup of the sticky proteins which create plaque in the brain, one of the telltale signs of Alzheimer's.
We discovered low dose have the ability to reduce beta amyloid production.
Dr. Trunhai Chow is an assistant professor at the Bird Alzheimer's Research Institute in Tampa, Florida. His belief, not only is THC safe and effective, but that it could be the future for the treatment of Alzheimer's.
THC is not that risky. It's good because Alzheimer's patient really has no effective drugs.
And it's not just THC that scientists think targets Alzheimer's plaques. They believe marijuana's other active ingredients, the cannabinoids, could reduce the overall inflammation in the brain, possibly providing benefit to many brain diseases. We first heard rumblings about this in 2013, when we visited GW Pharmaceuticals in the United Kingdom.
These flowering parts and the leaves around the flowering parts are coated with thousands of little balls. They're called trichomes, and the content is about 67% pure cannabinoid.
GW's chairman, Dr. Jeffrey Guy, and many others believe these precious chemicals are in fact neuroprotectants.
They will protect brain cells against insult and injury.
So not damaging, but protecting the brain.
When brain cells are stressed by trauma or other injury.
If you're skeptical, consider this. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has an actual financial stake in this exact sort of research. Their patent number 6630507, covers the use of cannabinoids as neuroprotectants.
It can protect against further brain damage.
Dr. Mark Rohrbaugh developed the patent for HHS.
How do you patent something that comes from a plant?
We're not patenting the compound. People are free to use the compound in other ways, subject to laws and other patents. So this is a method of using the compound for developing drugs to treat these types of diseases.
Like a progressive degenerative disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. It's caused by repetitive brain trauma from multiple concussions or consistent blows to the head.
Hopefully we can intervene in the process of late-stage neurodegeneration and suspend that process from going.
Dean Petkanis is the CEO of CanaLife, the company that bought the patent rights. Like Jeffrey Guy and the scientists at HHS, he believes this plant has so much potential. Potential to treat the untreatable, diseases that may all be related in the brain. Alzheimer's, CTE, and PTSD.
Let's study it and let's get the data.
Veteran Sean Kernan, stay-at-home mom Amelia Taylor. They are the new faces of PTSD. Successful, smart, but suffering, and unwilling to accept the fact that so little can be done to combat this invisible disease.
Where we see promising treatments, we should pursue those. Really what it should be about is compassionate use for the individual.
Compassion that he hopes can get Cicely and Doblin's PTSD research back on track. Little does he realize that support is about to come from an unlikely alliance.
I dare any senator to meet these patients here.
In all the years I've been investigating and reporting on medical marijuana, I never expected to see this. We will go there in just a moment. December 2014. Dr. Sue Cicely has arrived in the mile-high state of Colorado. The Board of Health is granting $9 million from a surplus tax collected on medical marijuana to now study its benefits. Cicely wants some of that money so she can set up her own research lab. Sean Kernan is here as well.
I'm a survivor of a lot of the issues you guys are dealing with medical marijuana.
He wants to convince the board that the PTSD and marijuana study should win.
I think it's going to hopefully show what many of us vets anecdotally are experiencing, which is a simple plant that's been around for eons is helping.
And just an hour and a half later, a vote.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes unanimously.
There are signs everywhere of a revolution gaining momentum. Mainstream medicine, serious academic scientists, previously so unwilling to dip a toe into the heavily stigmatized world of medical marijuana, are now diving in head first.
All sorts of people came out of the woodwork to try to help us, including VA researchers who are experts with marijuana use by vets with PTSD, and also researchers funded by NIDA, who are located at Johns Hopkins.
And now 1 year after the study was approved by the federal government, the plants are now fully grown, brimming with the chemicals that could hold so much promise. But one question still nags at Rick Doblin. Did it have to take so long? For decades, researchers have wanted to speed things up by getting a variety of marijuana strains from places other than the University of Mississippi, even taking the government to court. But every time, they lost. Now, in the midst of this revolution, even that may be changing. Director of NIDA, Nora Volkov.
We've started that dialogue with DEA. In order for us to advance the science, we're going to have to be able to provide very specific marijuana product.
I think that would be a huge deal.
Dr. Stacy Gruber knows what a turning point this would be.
Studies that have used marijuana from the government have been very, very helpful, but perhaps somewhat limited, especially as, quote, street product has gone through the roof in terms of potency and strain type. And I think the closer we get to studying real-world scenarios in the lab, the better off we're going to be.
That was fantastic. We're going to come on in and get you out.
A real-world scenario is exactly what Gruber was able to study. She didn't have to get the cannabis from Ole Miss. Patients like Amelia Taylor bought their marijuana from a local dispensary. And now we finally get to see what the impact has been. Her brain on cannabis. Now remember, she's been using marijuana every day for 3 months.
What we see is a very small focus.
Dr. Gruber found no evidence of impairment to Amelia's brain. There was a change over here in the anterior cingulate cortex. It's a part of the brain responsible for decision-making, emotion, and empathy, which could all play a role in PTSD.
Very, very compelling, and certainly leads me to want to look much more closely and much more in depth at this type of process.
Most importantly, Amelia felt better, reporting a 60% decrease in anxiety, something none of her previous medications had ever done. These are exciting results for a research revolution, a revolution that these 3 senators now want to take to the next level.
This bill that we are introducing seeks to right decades of wrong.
March 2015, Democrats Cory Booker and Kirsten Gillibrand, along with Republican Rand Paul, have just proposed the most audacious marijuana legislation in our lifetime. If it passes, it would create a fundamental change in the way the United States views and treats marijuana.
Our drug laws in this country as a whole need a revolution of common sense and compassion.
For starters, it would do something scientists have been begging for: reschedule cannabis from Schedule 1 to a much less restrictive Schedule 2 controlled substance.
Once you make the class of drugs Schedule 2, you can then research it and find out what are the medical impacts and when can you use it, when does it make sense. So that is what's necessary here. It's so simple.
The bill would also mandate more farms to grow research-grade marijuana and allow greater access to it for those in need, including veterans who would, for the first time, be able to get a prescription for medicinal marijuana from the VA hospitals.
Let's stop the pot hypocrisy. We now have had 3 presidents that have admitted to smoking marijuana. People in public office all throughout the Senate have said, hey, I've smoked marijuana recreationally. How much of a hypocrite do you have to be to say that I broke American laws using pot as a recreational thing, and that I'm not going to support this idea that as a medicine for severely sick people, that they shouldn't be able to access this drug?
It's an important question, a question that I took to the President of the United States.
There's a bill on the floor of the Senate now proposing that marijuana get rescheduled from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, saying it has no medicinal benefit to possible medicinal benefit. Do you support that?
You know, I think I'd have to take a look at the details, but I'm on record as saying that not only do I think carefully prescribed medical use of marijuana may in fact be appropriate, and we should follow the science as opposed to ideology on this issue.
It has been that message all along, throughout our history. Ideology has trumped science often, too often. But every now and then a revolution takes hold and is guided by those unwilling to give up.
We got to keep the pressure on, because the only thing that's getting this thing moved forward is the pressure.
A revolution that has moved so far in nearly 3 years, when we first met young Charlotte and saw her life transformed by medical marijuana. A government who once fought, now supports. A farm once barren, now abundant. Studies once forbidden, now underway, trying to provide scientific proof that could change, and yes, even save lives, like it did for Sean Kernan and his family.
You think it helped save him?
I do.
You know, we've walked down those roads together, and it's been a process that has been by no means fun or painless, but we're here today, and that's kind of how we look at it, and we look at it from the perspective of helping others.
Helping others and changing the world. The marijuana revolution has only just begun.